He never moved, not even an inch. Just a dark silhouette framed by the humming fluorescent lights above the gas pumps, staring at me through the glass doors. By the time the clock hit 3 a.m., I realized he had been there for hours. It was a Thursday night, or I guess technically Friday morning. The air inside the gas station always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and floor cleaner, masked by the hum of the cooler behind me. I'd worked enough graveyard shifts to grow numb to the silence between customers, just the rattle of the ancient AC and the occasional sigh of the ice machine breaking the stillness. Nights like that usually dragged on, but I'd come to depend on the monotony. At first I thought nothing of him. Customers pulled up at weird hours all the time, especially truckers or night owls grabbing smokes. But this man, or at least I think it was a man, he didn't move toward the doors. He didn't check his pockets for change. He just stood in the pool of flickering light like he'd been planted there, his face swallowed by shadows. The only thing I could make out was the pale glint of eyes fixed on me. I looked away, pretending to focus on straightening candy bars near the register, but even through the corner of my vision I could feel it, his gaze pressing through the glass. A heat in the pit of my stomach started to crawl upward, tightening the back of my throat. After 5 minutes, I unlocked the mic to the gas pump intercom and buzzed. "Hey, you need something?" No response, not a shift in his shoulders, not even the shuffle of feet. The neon sign above the store buzzed sharply and I flinched. The sound ricocheted in the empty station, and for a second I thought he'd vanish when I looked up again. But no, he was still there. By 2:15, my nerves pushed me into calling the station phone, the one we used for non-emergencies. I dialed my manager, half hoping she would tell me he was just some local who came around a lot. It rang and rang, straight to voicemail. The silence in the store thickened. I could hear details I usually tuned out. The faint buzzing of a fly trapped in the light fixture, the clicking too-quick rhythm of the clock on the wall, even my own pulse hammering in my ears. Outside, he remained a statue. At 2:40, a car finally pulled into the lot. My relief evaporated instantly when I saw how it played out. The driver, a man in a delivery uniform, slowed to fuel up but stopped abruptly as he spotted the figure. Instead of pulling next to the pump, he swerved across the lot and parked on the far side, muttering to himself as he stayed glued to his seat. For half a second, I thought he'd come inside, but he didn't. He turned his wheel and drove away, like he wanted nothing to do with it. That's when dread really cemented itself in me. Whatever this thing was, people noticed, and they wanted no part of it. I should have called the police. I even picked up the phone to do it. But as I set my finger on the keypad, a thought chilled me. What the hell would I report? Some guy's standing outside. He hasn't made a move, hasn't threatened me. Yet the deeper fear tangled my words before I could dial, that maybe naming what I was seeing would somehow make it worse. Minutes slowed. My skin prickled from the glow of the overhead lighting, too bright, too artificial, as though it was peeling me open along with the empty aisles. Every so often I'd glance up at the security mirror dome above the register to check my blind spots. Nothing but rows of snacks and freezers. Still, unease chewed at the base of my spine. At 3:03, the hum of the cooler hiccuped and stuttered before settling back into its rhythm. In that second of silence I heard it, so soft it tickled my brain like a whisper pressed against the glass. A slight scrape, like fingernails grazing the door handle. My skin went cold. I turned toward the entrance, and there he still was, head tilted a fraction lower now, eyes catching the fluorescent glow in a way that looked wrong, too steady, too unblinking. I couldn't take it anymore. I shoved my chair back so hard it toppled, rushing toward the cash office in the back. But when I grabbed the keys and turned to glance through the doorway, every muscle in me tightened. The figure was gone. I exhaled, my chest shuddering as relief and terror tangled together. He hadn't come inside. I would have heard the chime above the door, which meant he'd simply vanished. I waited another half hour, hunched in the office chair with the door locked, eyes glued to the small black and white monitor connected to the exterior cameras. 3 feeds flicked between static and dim pools of parking lot light. Pump 1 empty, pump 2 vacant, entrance clear. At 3:47 I blinked, rubbing my eyes, and when I opened them, my lungs locked still. He was back, not in front of the glass doors now, but closer. much closer. The camera above the counter showed his silhouette pressed to the side window, face turned directly at the locked office. The monitor's grain made his features blur, but his eyes, they reflected a sharp, pale glint as though they weren't reflecting at all, but glowing from within. I didn't make another call, didn't touch the lights. I just sat frozen, hands gripping the armrests, listening to the hum of machines bury his silence. By 4 a.m., when the morning clerk came to relieve me, the footage showed nothing. But even now, whenever I pass a set of glass doors at night, I swear I feel eyes on me, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to remember that some customers never really leave. The elevator doors should have opened to the brightness of the lobby, but instead they slid apart into silence, revealing a hallway I didn't recognize. The lights were dim, the walls peeling, and further down, in the shadows, someone was already standing there, perfectly still. I worked the night shift at a mid-sized corporate office in downtown Chicago. Nothing glamorous, just building security. 12 hours of cameras, patrols, and the occasional cigarette in the service stairwell to break the monotony. The place is normally lifeless after 8 p.m., and the only people I sometimes ran into were late-night lawyers or janitors humming through their shift. That night was no different, until I decided to take the service elevator down to the lobby for a quick coffee. The elevator itself was old, paint flaking near the buttons, a faint smell of machine oil lingering every time the doors creaked open. I'd ridden it 100 times, and it always rattled slightly, like it was protesting against its own function. Still, I stepped in, pressed L, and leaned against the back wall as the hum of descent began. Halfway down, the hum stuttered. A single flicker of the fluorescent light above sank the box into brief darkness. Then it steadied again, and I felt the elevator shudder as if it had stopped at a floor that shouldn't exist. The doors slid open, not to the glossy marble lobby I expected, but to a gray corridor I didn't recognize. The first detail that struck me was the smell. Stale air, laced with mildew and an odd metallic tang. The walls were cracked, the paint blistering and curling like dead skin. Overhead lights buzzed faintly but seemed to give off less illumination than they should, leaving long pockets of shadow stretching across the floor. And then I saw the figure. Someone was there, 20 feet down the hallway. Standing perfectly still, their outline barely separated from the dark they blended into. My gut reaction was that maybe it was just another employee. But there was no reason for anyone to be waiting in that place, in that condition. They didn't move. I cleared my throat. Hey, what floor is this? The jitter in my own voice embarrassed me, so I stepped one cautious foot forward, the rubber soles of my boots sticking slightly on the floor. Every instinct screamed at me not to step out, but curiosity pulled me. The figure made no sound, no shuffle, no acknowledgement, just standing. The silence became oppressive. Even the hum of the elevator had died, leaving me with only the faint flickering bulbs above and the buzzing in my own ears. I hit the lobby button again, almost reflexively, but the elevator didn't move. The doors stayed open. The buttons didn't even light up. A bead of sweat traced down my temple, though the air had a numbing chill to it. Then the figure tilted its head. Not much, just enough to let me know it had registered me. My stomach dropped. The gesture was too deliberate, like it had been waiting for me to see it move. I staggered backward into the elevator, keeping my eyes fixed on the shadowy form. My trembling thumb jabbed at other buttons now. B2, 5, 6, anything. Dead. None of them worked. The only sound was my own breathing quickening inside the steel box and the faint pop of a dying bulb in the hallway outside. The figure took a step forward, just one. The sound of the sole dragging against the concrete was enough to snap me into panic. I hit the door close button over and over. The panels began to creak, sliding slowly together. Relief started to creep through my chest until, just before the seams sealed, a voice drifted in. Low, calm, close, as though whispered directly into my ear. You're not supposed to be here. The doors clamped shut. I stumbled back against the rear wall, wide-eyed at the blank steel. My own reflection stared back, pale and hollow. The elevator finally lurched, as though snapping out of a spell, and it descended properly this time. Within seconds, the real lobby doors opened up, bright lights, marble, the smell of fresh polish. I walked out on shaky legs, heart pounding against my ribs. The receptionist's desk stood empty as it always did at night. Everything looked normal, too normal. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, a mix of exhaustion and the building's decaying machinery twisting into paranoia. I even laughed under my breath weakly, as if to shrug it off. But that's when I saw it. On the floor, right by the lobby elevator doors, was a single wet footprint. Too large to be mine, bare, and pointing inward, into the elevator I had just come from. I don't use that lift anymore. Maybe it was hallucination. Maybe some electrical glitch twisted my brain into seeing things in the shadows. But every night as I sit watching over the monitors, my eyes always linger on camera 12, the outside shot of the service elevator. Sometimes at around 3 in the morning, the doors slide open on their own. And though no one steps out, I swear I can see something standing just beyond the threshold, waiting for someone else to press the wrong button. His lips never moved, but I swear I heard it. My name breathed from the cracked throat of the man who had not opened his eyes all night. The sound was faint, like someone whispering from underwater. Yet when I leaned closer, his monitors stayed steady, and he remained unconscious. Night shifts in the ER are their own kind of haunting. The fluorescent lights buzzed constantly, staining everything pale. The air smelled of antiseptic and metal, a sharp tang that clung to my scrubs. It was around 2:30 a.m., the witching hour for hospitals, when time seemed to stop and even the living felt suspended between worlds. The man in bed 7 had arrived a little after midnight. Hit and run, they said, 40-something. Unidentifiable until morning, his features hidden behind swelling and heavy bandages. He hadn't stirred once since admission, stable vitals but heavily sedated, wrapped head to chest in gauze, a silent patient, waiting for someone else to decide whether he lived or died. I volunteered to take his watch, mostly because the ER was unusually quiet. My colleagues busied themselves with paperwork. The halls felt cavernous, with only the distant squeak of a janitor's mop echoing against the tile. The crash cart reflected shadows off the waxed floor, and the beep-beep of the cardiac monitors seemed unnaturally loud, each one beating seconds into my skull. I was jotting vitals into the chart when I heard it. Claire. It was so soft, I thought I'd imagined it. My pen froze mid-stroke. Slowly, I turned toward the bed. His chest rose and fell in that same steady rhythm. His eyes remained swollen shut, lips crusted at the edges from intubation earlier. I leaned closer. Maybe it was just the hiss of air through the oxygen tube or the creak of the ancient HVAC. But then, clear as daylight. Claire. Both syllables faint, drawn out. My name, not just once, but intentional. His jaw never moved. The muscles beneath the bandages were still slack, yet I felt warm breath against my ear when I bent near him. The prickling at my scalp was instant. Nobody here knew me well. I'd only started working at this hospital 2 months ago. This patient had been unconscious since arrival. How could he possibly know who I was? I stepped back quickly, almost knocking over the IV pole. My first thought was to check the monitors. Heart rhythm steady, blood pressure normal, oxygen saturation unchanged. There was no indication of waking, no neural activity spike on the screen. Yet the whisper hung in the air like static. The fluorescent bulbs above flickered once. I told myself it was coincidence, tried to steady my shaking hand as I charted the vitals with more force than necessary. Maybe exhaustion was catching up. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and sleep was a stranger on double shifts like this. Hallucinations weren't impossible. But then it came again. This time, not a whisper, though still quiet. My name spoken from everywhere and nowhere at once. Almost like the sound seeped through the air vents, sliding under the hospital's white noise, and I realized something chilling. It wasn't coming from his mouth. It was coming from the room itself, though the voice was undeniably his. I felt the cold before I noticed I was trembling. The air conditioning was always low, but this was different. A sudden dip, like stepping into a refrigerator, needles of air crawling down my arms. My instinct screamed to leave, to call a doctor or another nurse, but something kept me rooted. A morbid obligation maybe, or simple terror sharp enough to paralyze me. I forced myself to speak. You can't know my name. You're sedated. The only reply came in that voice again, raspier, closer. I see you, Claire. I staggered backward, hitting the counter behind me hard enough to clatter a tray of instruments. My chest constricted. I kept my eyes locked on him because every instinct told me not to blink. If I blinked, something worse would happen. But then, he moved. Not the violent shift of someone waking, no. His hand twitched against the bed rail, fingers curling slowly as though reaching, only for a moment. Vitals unchanged, still unconscious, still gone. And yet he whispered one final time, "Behind you." My breath stopped. The pulse in my ears roared. Against every warning firing in my brain, I turned my head toward the darkened window at the far end of the ward, the blinds half drawn. In the reflection, I saw myself, pale and rigid with fear, and behind me, standing just at my shoulder, another silhouette. Tall, featureless, watching. I spun around, but of course there was nothing, just rows of motionless beds bathed in sterile light. When I looked back at the patient, his hand had slackened again. His body lay still beneath the bandages, the picture of sleep. And yet, when I leaned closer out of some compulsive need to check, I swore under the gauze. The shape of his mouth had shifted, curled upward at the corners in a smile that shouldn't have been possible. I refused to take another night shift in that hospital. But sometimes, in the darkest hours of sleep, I hear him again, whispering my name, preparing to tell me what's behind me next.